the material that is written in 2 chapters here. Chapter 7, which is entitled, not 7, but is it 9? The Quality of Freedom. Oh, yes, it is, chapter 7. The Quality of Freedom. And then number 8, Discerning My Way. So the title of number 8 is actually the one that focuses on the matter at hand. What should I do? Faced with a situation where I'm at a crossroads or at a fork in the road, what should I do? Should I take this or should I take that? Or there may be other forks that I am not fully aware of or that I'm aware of but I don't totally accept yet or appreciate. So how can I expand my consciousness so that I'm aware of all of the options facing me and then move forward in a way that is best for myself and for everybody? And what is that? What does that mean? Best for myself. Now, first thing, in Christian language or in religious language, it is the language that Ignatius himself uses. And so he says, our choices are to be made according to our purpose and foundation for which we were born. So what we have taken or what we have covered in the earlier part of the exercises needs to be a reference point in asking the question, what am I to do? Namely, what is my overall purpose in life? What am I here for? And where am I going? What is my vision of my ultimate destiny? So with all of those big questions on the horizon, Ignatius has already taken us through a process where we are clear about a certain set of values that we have now begun to take on. The first week, as you recall, is the week where we look at our own messy way of life, and the global situation is also in a mess, and we look at the root causes of that. And so this is something that corresponds to the 4 noble truths of the Buddha. We see a situation that is undesirable, that is out of sync. So rather than trying to put a stopgap or trying to eliminate it by getting a fix, just like a surgery that would cut out everything without even tracing all of the factors, we need to look at the root causes and then envision a situation where once those root causes are gone, what kind of state of mind, state of being, state of life, way of life is envisioned. And so that would be the picture of wholeness or healing or harmony that we're looking for. And that in Buddhist terms would be, well, nirvana or the ultimate arrival of a person towards total freedom and living full enlightenment. And so toward arriving there, the Buddha has prescribed the so-called Eightfold Path, so the practical steps, prescriptions toward arriving there. And now for Ignatius, seeing that our being is not just for our own little sake, but we are called precisely to live eternal communion in God's love. And so the way to do that is, as Ignatius puts in his words, to praise, reverence, and serve God, our Creator and Lord. How can we make everything in our life in accordance with that ultimate purpose? Praise, reverence, and serve our Creator and Lord, and thereby attain that fullness of life that we seek. So those are two equal, not one leads to the other, but from our Zen reading, as I explained before, the fullness of life, the wholeness that we are seeking is that very purpose. But it's not just the wholeness in terms of how can I be happy in this life, but it's really something that covers that life that I'm responsible for even beyond this temporal existence, whatever belief system we may have regarding our afterlife. So to put it in those terms, now we are faced with individual choices. So how can we make those choices in accordance with or shed enlightened by that illumination from my understanding of my ultimate purpose. So for that, Ignatius has a very practical set of guidelines. Well, we went through the first week, and when we looked at the causes of our messiness, then we took a resolve, and each one is invited to just follow this on your own. When you see that there are some things in your life that were leading you to fall astray, causing your being in a messy situation and so on, you take a look at that and resolve to go the other way. So that's the transition from the first week to the second week. And so to live the way of wholeness, the way of well-being, the way of God's love, the way of following God's will, the Christian tradition has this very direct invitation. Look at Jesus. He is the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus is the embodiment of the divine life here on earth. So look at the way he lived life and see how you may be able to embody that yourself. So whether we are members of the Christian community, or whether we're looking in from the outside, or whether we're just not subscribing to all of that, we're simply proposing, or Ignatius is simply proposing, Jesus as a model of the way. And so take a look and see whether we might learn something from Jesus, whether we believe in the Christian doctrines about Jesus or not. And so we see how Jesus is one who really lives totally selflessly, and in that way of living selflessly, because of the confidence that he is the beloved one, then he's able to give himself back in love, and in so doing is able to examine and call the conventions of society and overturn them, and propose a way of life that is not caught up in the conventions of society. Right? Everybody does it, and so everybody needs a nice house and is aiming at a flashy car and all of these fashion things and so on. Seeing through that, he shows us what really is most important, overturning those conventional values. And we saw that in our previous couple of sessions. So now we are at that point where we're more or less seeing a way of life that has seen through those basic things, and are now disposed to living the fullness of life with that inner freedom of living according to our ultimate purpose. But now Ignatius takes us back to some practical pointers to review what has been already undertaken in the exercises, but in a more practical way. So he gives us these images of the two standards. The two standards is a very picturesque kind of contemplative exercise that Ignatius proposes because of his militaristic background. So for him, as a soldier, the most natural thing for such a person in such a profession, who really gave his life to his profession, he could really die in a battle, and he almost did. He had his leg wounded. Was, whom do you serve? Under whose service are you in? So he was then under the Duke of Navarre, was it or not? Was it? Yeah. So he was serving a duke, and if that duke is someone whom he can admire and whom he can see as someone who stands for those values that he can really give himself to, then he gives himself all out in the service of that duke. Now there may be an enemy duke or an enemy king or an enemy leader that duke is put up against, and so that's the imagery he gets. The two leaders with their two standards. The standard is taken from the flag of these two warring camps. So he pictures Christian life as this battle between the kingdom of Christ and the kingdom of Satan. That one who tempts us to, against our better selves, to really live in a way that disrupts, or in a way that undermines the wholeness that we are seeking. That's the tempter's way. And the other way is that which tends towards wholeness. So we've already gone through this in the first week, but now Ignatius puts it back again. So what are your fundamental values here. Whom are you serving? What master are you serving? And so here, just a basic consideration, whether you subscribe to the Christian imagery or not. Are you still living a life basically centered on what I can get out of it? Am I just out here for my own ambition, for my own little happiness, for my own getting ahead in the world so that I will feel good about myself, to the neglect or to the setting aside of everyone else? Is that kind of life still something that may hold sway for me? And so that's the kingdom of Satan in Ignatius' terms. A life that's based on just I, me, mine, I want this, I want that, and nobody will get in my way. If we look at the world and people around us, trying to be compassionate and with a heart of loving kindness, it is so sad to see that there are individuals in our midst who are still caught up in that whole way of life, just centered on what's in it for me. So the way we can offer ourselves is really to just be a friend and just see how maybe in associating with them, not trying to be a holier than thou kind of person in that friend, but just try to point out and have, if we can, if we're close enough to that person, to have conversations and ask, is this really what you're about, and so on. And so maybe our friendship can make a difference in that person's life. But, well, okay, so we're no longer that kind of person, and we're now really earnestly seeking to live a life of wholeness. We're seeking the way of genuine human and authentic life. So we are now clearly following what Ignatius has already laid for us as the standard of the divine will in our lives, the standard of Christ. So that's the first checkpoint. Am I still caught up in the what's in it for me, what's good for me? We may be entering a spiritual path still with that in mind. We're now no longer satisfied with the material comforts because we had our share of them, and so, okay, now I'll turn to spiritual benefits. And this is what Chogyam Trungpa, well-known Tibetan Zen master who was also known for his crazy wisdom, wrote about in his book called Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. Are we going into the spiritual path but still in a way that is simply acquisitive? I want that. Oh, I want to be enlightened. I want to be admired. I want to be called a spiritual person. And so we cultivate all of these practices really just as a way of feeding our own ego on a spiritual level. So that can be a very, very dangerous mode of being, thinking that we're spiritual and yet we're just using spirituality for our own ego. So that tempter lurks everywhere, even in those of us who have already thought that we're taking on the path. So that's one point. Now, this chapter is entitled The Quality of Freedom. So first of all, we are now, we may realize that our life is in a mess and I want to live in a different way. So how can we proceed? Well, in proceeding, we may realize we are still caught up in certain habits of doing or thinking. We may still be caught up in our obsessions, in our addictions. So we have to acknowledge that. If we have some sort of addiction, it could be to some substance, it could be to some way of life, it could be to something that I cannot stop myself from doing, like shopping, or too much caffeine, or too much of this or that. I may be well-intentioned and seeking to live a whole and wholesome life, but there are things that just nag at me because I'm not fully in control, I'm not fully free yet. So how can we free ourselves from those kinds of addictions that block our way? They are like fetters that prevent us from moving freely. So that's one stage that needs to be checked. But now if we're doing some rehab, for example, or are checking our addictions and are being mindful, if we are now in a state of practice, especially of meditative or contemplative practice that is able to watch those and be able to avoid them when they come, then how can we proceed? So now Ignatius brings us the image of the three types of persons. The first person, he gives us the example of someone who acquires a big amount through some ways that are still questionable. For example, somebody, a criminal boss, happens to be someone you know, and tells you, okay, could you just hold on to this stash of money for me? And that person disappears, isn't heard from for years. But you have this stash of money that you have, and you don't know what to do with it. If you use it, it might be illegal. Those bills might be marked, or maybe not. You're not sure. So you're not sure what to do with it, even on those ethical grounds. And then, so there are three kinds of persons that Ignatius describes being put in that situation. The first one is the one who procrastinates. So it's just right there in your somewhere in your room, and you don't know what to do with it, whether to actually go and check it out and ask the police whether this is legal or not, and so on. So such a person knows that there is an issue at hand that needs to be addressed, but keeps on postponing, and sometimes it can just be postponed until you die. That can happen. Something important is nudging at us, and yet we don't pay attention in a way that we just forget it and it's gone. It's there, but we don't pay attention, and so we lose it. That's the first person. Are we the procrastinator who skirts making that decision? And so before we know it, the decision is made for us in one way or the other without our freedom. The second kind of person is someone who sees that and says, I want to live an honest and wholesome life, but I also want the money. So what can I do to rationalize how I can use it for myself? And so that's the second kind of person, the one who can, how do you put it, manipulate things, rationalize things in a way that justifies a way of using that money, whatever device you might think of for that person. And the third kind of person is really the one who is truly living totally honestly and totally open, and is saying, if this is something that is not illegal and it's really given to me, then I will use it to the best of my ability. But if it is, I'm ready to give it up. So that person, for example, go to the police or report it to authorities and have that money checked, and to be sure that that person who left it is truly away or dead in a way that will no longer have any access or will no longer need it, so that one is virtually in custody of that money. And having known that, having checked in all of that, to see what good that money can do, not just for one's own life, but for the benefit of all. So there's a way of using that for the benefit in a way that your conscience is clear. You're using it not for your own sake, but precisely so that that money can be given what it's used for, namely to satisfy people's needs and enable them to live a wholesome life. So that's the third kind of person that Ignatius sets up before us. So the question there is, which kind are we? So that's a point of self-examination. Am I ready to really give this up if necessary? Or am I still attached to it that I'm trying to rationalize my way to keep it? So that third person ready to give it up is the person that Ignatius describes also in his principle and foundation as the person who is indifferent. In Buddhist terms, that is the person who is truly with non-attachment, non-attached to this or that, and is simply totally free to make a choice based on what is best in the situation. So have we cultivated that non-attachment to a point that we can be that kind of person? And we're not clinging to something and not trying to manipulate or rationalize that we want this, but we know it's not clear, so so we have a split level consciousness trying to get the best of something while trying to rationalize it in our mind. That's one image that Ignatius brings. So which kind of person are we of those three types? Then the next one that Ignatius calls to our attention in terms of making a choice are the 3 degrees of what I call 3 degrees of engagement. In Ignatius' vocabulary, these are the 3 degrees of humility, the 3 degrees in which a person who seeks to do good and who seeks to live a wholesome life find themselves in their inner disposition. First disposition is, of course, the basic one. We all want to live a decent life. We don't want to break the law. We don't want to break the commandments. We don't want to do anything immoral. And I believe that that applies to any conscientious person. We want to live the bottom line of decency and human conscience and goodness. And then Ignatius says there's another degree of living at fullness. This is the degree of non-attachment that is espoused in Christianity, the degree of not being attached to this or that. Those of us who have taken on this life called the married life, the usual formula for that is you take this person for richer, for poorer, for better, for worse,
in sickness and health.
In sickness and in health and so on. So you are not attached to sickness and health. Of course, you prefer health, but if you're sick, you take that and so on. So it's that kind of equanimity. And so it's also, in a sense, a virtue in the Buddhist tradition, a sense of equanimity, whether it's sickness or it's health, whether it's wealth or whether it's poverty, whatever the situation calls for, to take that in all freedom. But now Ignatius, that seems very attractive. That seems to be the ideal of Buddhist non-attachment, and that's fine. And if we get that degree, then that's already something that can be so admirable. And yet there's a 3rd degree that Ignatius proposes for those who really want to go the whole way. So the second one is what he would call indifference, or an equanimity or non-attachment to sickness or health or wealth or poverty. But the 3rd degree is what he puts in the image of Christ. If the one I love is poor, I prefer to be poor rather than being rich and having the one I love differently. And in this case, well, for him it's the image of Christ. To be poor with Christ poor, and to be insulted and to be maligned rather than be honored with Christ, maligned and honored. Do you see the difference between the second and third? The second one would be equal and not attached to either, but for this one, you go the next way and prefer actually the one that is humanly, not naturally more preferable. But the important distinction here is it's not just going against the grain either. It's not being masochistic. It's not choosing poverty for its own sake, but precisely empowered by love and motivated by love. So now, in a Buddhist term or a non-Christian expression, can this be presented? My sense is that there are individuals who live like that. There are individuals who, whether they're religious or not, feel, for example, killing of animals is a big cruelty, especially if you see the system in which cows are butchered in a very non-bovine, I would say non-humane, because, of course, it's a different level, but a very cruel way, and also pigs and chickens and so on. And so you'd rather not partake of that kind of pleasure of eating the meat of those, or the flesh of those, the cooked flesh of those animals, and rather choose a more simple way of life. That's one kind of example I can have in mind here. Or there are some who really see that our ecological situation is deteriorating, and good number of people who are living in those places close to nature, like dwellers near the forest and so on, are being deprived of their environment. So they choose to go there and really live among them and really try to better the situation, not from a philanthropic point of view from above, doling outcasts so they can help them, but really living with them and being poor and simple with them, with their hearts burning towards changing the world situation, living with those who are bearing the brunt of the world's oppressive structures. There are such persons, whether they're religious or not, whom we can really acknowledge as those who have made that choice on the third degree, to rather deprive myself of certain goods that are legitimate, nothing to prevent my taking them, but precisely because my heart is calling me to live more fully in solidarity with those who are made to suffer from the world's unjust structures, then that's the one that we choose with joy. Can we choose it with joy and not with some kind of spite and look at me, I'm doing this, and the judgmental kind. I'm a vegetarian, you meat eaters, you are destroying the world, or you are contributing to this or that and so on. So there are persons who choose that for some noble reason, but then again it can eat their ego and say, I'm better than thou because I do this, and look at all of those people who don't. So if that becomes a tendency, then better start eating meat or better start doing the same things rather than having that, because that can be more harmful as an attitude. Now, shifting the page, now the more proper question is, okay, given those degrees of freedom that we need to examine ourselves on, let's say we're ready to really live fully according to the purpose for which I am made, and really ready to live the ultimate in the best way I can, and I'm free to make that choice. What do we do? And this is where a choice like what Bill has just described, or the choice of our Zen community, or individual choices, like right now I'm at a stage where, for example, not me, but somebody saying, I feel that my job is not contributing to the wholeness of humanity because I'm in, let's say, kind of a company that depends on taking lumber from the forest, and I know that that's contributing to the ecological destruction, and yet that's what my company does. So what should I do? And yet if I quit, here's my family, my children, and they need that income that I can generate from my job, so that'll leave them in a state of poverty, or that'll leave us in a state of insecurity. I have my family also to take care of. But yet, conscience is now tugging at me. What should I do? And yet I want to live in the best way I can. So I can see how in our contemporary situation, so many of our contemporaries can be faced with this similar situation. Those who just start becoming aware of what's happening in the world, and yet they're employed in a place that somehow is not the kind that can be life-giving, but they need it precisely to earn their livelihood. Or you find out that your company is engaged in the arms trade, and so on. You may not be the one directly doling out or sending out those shipments of arms, but the whole company that you're giving your life to precisely as in exchange for the livelihood it gives you is doing that. So you're caught in a dilemma. So that's just one example. But also these examples of, should I, for my career, should I choose this? Should I be a doctor? Or should I be something else? And so on. Or should I be a social worker? So young persons also are in a state that face this kind of situation, a choice that can make the difference in how they live the rest of their lives. So whatever age we may be, these choices come upon us, and they can have very momentous consequences for the rest of our life. What are our criteria? So here Ignatius has a set of ground rules that he offers. And so he says, first of all, you have to determine whether you are already set on living this way of life, and you're already freed from your attachments and freed from your obsessions and addictions. Because if you're not, then different signs need to be checked. Again, to use the Christian language that Ignatius poses, if someone is still just living the life of the I, me, mine, Ignatius says, the good spirit, the one that tugs at your conscience, is functions in a way that shakes you from your smugness, from your slumber, and so gives you a sense of struggling with your conscience. So it disturbs your, quote, peace, which is not really peace, but your smugness. So that's how the good spirit works. Whereas the tempting spirit, what he calls the evil spirit, serves to assure you, no, it's okay, go ahead, no problem, no problem. So it works in that way for someone who's still caught up in those addictions. But for someone who is now earnestly come to a stage of seeking to live a wholesome life, the good spirit is one that tends to give you inner peace. And so here is the guideline that Ignatius poses as the first one, and which I adapt in a threefold set of norms for making a choice. So if I take this or take that, which one gives me a sense of total inner peace and equanimity that I can live with myself for the rest of my life, and I can die with this? That inner peace that gives me the total confidence that I can stake my life for this. I can be responsible and everybody can blame me, and yet I'm at peace with it. Which choice is that? And then the opposite of that is, if I look at, let's say, the same one, if I take this, then something in me tells me, nah, maybe there's still something else, or I'm not quite at ease with it yet, and there's still some rumblings in me that tells me, really, should I do this? Ignatius' advice is, if you feel those rumblings of questions and doubts, then don't rush into making a decision. So wait for the advent of that true inner peace that can make you say, I'm ready to die with this, and I will live with the consequences of this as long as I live. If there is that inner equanimity in envisioning that choice, then that's the one to go for. Now that one can be against everything that your friends may be saying. Your friends may be saying, no, look, if you do this, you'll get a better reputation, this one is good for you. Why are you doing that? Why are you making that choice? So no matter what others may say, if that inner peace is with you in a way that you can say, I respect them, thank you for your advice, but still my heart tells me this is the way to go, then that's the way to go. That's the first one, inner peace, that's the criteria. Secondly, is it accompanied by a sense of humility? Is it something that allows me to realize that I am by no means perfect, I still need guidance from others, I still need to hear others' advice in proceeding, and so it's not that I'm cocksure of this, been there, done that, and so therefore I can do it without anybody's help. And in Christian terms, I need continual openness to God's guidance and grace in proceeding along the way. Not that now I've made the decision, then I can go all the way and I'm cocksure about it. So that cocksureness can also be against us, even though we may feel I'm at peace with this. It can just be a sense of pride that I'll do things no matter what anybody else says. So watch that subtle inner movement. And if it can be acknowledged as truly accompanied by that sense of humility, the willingness to learn and the willingness to go on and revise one's path along the way, although in the same direction, then that's a wholesome sign. And the third sign would be whether this choice allows me to live with greater love and compassion for myself as well as for those around me and for everyone in the world. Or does it just lead me to a sense of self-satisfaction and being aloof from others, saying, I've made my choice and so therefore I don't need anybody else, and I don't care what anybody else says, or I don't care of the outcome of what I choose on others. If there is that sense of choosing just for one's own sake, without that element of compassion, then watch that. Be careful to follow that, and it just be another sidetracking or another misleading idea. So those are the 3 checkpoints, in short, that I would like to just offer, calling from St. Ignatius's many rules for discernment of spirits, which, if you read them, can be a little complicated and confusing, but I've just offered it in a kind of a summary form in these 3 guidelines: inner peace, humility, and compassion. But let me add one more dimension that is truly very vital and crucial. And this is the dimension I didn't fully treat well enough in the book, but which, if I ever do come up with the next edition, I'd like to put in with a little more illustration. Namely, in trying to make a choice between this or that, or another thing, where do I find my passion? Which choice brings up the fires in me that I can really feel, this is it. In choosing this, I'm really living and I'm really fully alive. Where is my passion? And so, in that passion, we check whether that's a real living passion or just an infatuation of the moment that can die down again, and really check it against those 3 factors of peace, humility, and compassion. And if it matches, then by all means, go for it and be ready to die for it. And a good many cases, we don't die but continue to live a very fruitful life after having gone through that death to our little self, and now we see the fullness of life that ensues from the decision that we have made in freedom and with that kind of careful discernment. Very simple guidelines, but we can be clouded in our path if we miss this or that, or there are always pitfalls along the way. And so we need to have some help from one another in discussing what some implications are, or what may have applied in your life, or what may have resonated, and what questions may come. So I'd like to open the floor now for general comments or sharing with the whole group, and then we'll take, after about 10 or 15 minutes, we'll go into the smaller groups. Any comments, questions, responses? Yes?
Before you go into those 4 modes of action that you
Yes.
just listed, wouldn't you do a questioning period and gather information and find out everything you could about the situation?
Oh yes, that is one of the elements that need to be taken into consideration when you're faced with it. That's right, I did not mention that explicitly, but gather all the information, and Ed has done a good job in outlining them for yourself. You asked all the doctors and look at all of the implications. So that's the example. You're clear now. These are all the implications. So for us, for our Sangha, in our Sangha case, we need to gather that information. So we have a search committee to look at all of the possible properties that we might be able to consider, and we need time for that. Any other comment, question?
Reuben, I found great peace in discerning our way, that Zen sitting and contemplative centering meet together
Yes.
in the way of being quiet our mind, and letting clarity come through being still and
Yes.
listening.
Right.
And Bill, I'm going to do that for you. I think it's
Yes.
because it's not only the human part of it, which is knowing all the implications of the choices and all of that, but if we're giving ourselves
Yes.
to God or a greater being, or however you want to term it, and we want to live out the purpose for our life,
Yes.
then we, in making that choice, we lift it up
Yes.
and ask for clarity.
Correct. And the clarity can come
And
from
the
within.
clarity comes. And Bill, I must say that my heart was really stirred when you said nobody really is affected by, you aren't married or whatever.
Yeah.
But now wait a minute. What I was going to say is I saw with great clarity was Bill works with the special needs, older children and young adults in our church, and I could see their relationship with him and his pouring himself in to the lives. He was truly a vessel, an instrument in that case. And I think sometimes we might see parts of our life but not be able to see other parts of how we really are used
And we impact others.
and the
without
impact.
realizing.
And so clarity comes from listening.
Correct.
I think that's true. I do have two ministries, and one of mine is to the special needs community and Highland Park Methodist, and also around the city, those who come there for our gestures, but also our night owls and the Sunday school class for special needs. And my other is living in a community of refugees.
Yeah.
And so I can appreciate how, think of someone you knew that died. How much do you really think of it? We passed away. We're just like wisps of smoke and we're gone. And, it's like,
It's a very, very stoic kind of attitude. Which
Well,
is, I'm not saying it's bad, but just
yeah.
describing.
no, I think stoic would be a decent approximation of my
Yeah, I
outlook,
see, I hear you, yeah.
And, but, the fact is, it's not like the death of a parent for some people, or the death of a child, or something like, that has like really life-wrenching, consequences. So that's why I say I think my life or death is fundamentally inconsequential, in a very practical, utilitarian sense.
If I may make a comment, or if I may address that, without trying to tell you this or that, or without trying to come
Yes.
from another point, I would say, no, don't do that way. But simply to suggest, is there perhaps a sense of already giving up on life in that stoic, so-called stoic attitude? So where's the passion, is the question. Well, maybe it's not so much the word to look for, but that sense of really appreciating this gift of life in a way that I would like to treasure it to the last minute I am given, and thereby live fully in a way that I can be grateful for every minute. Or am I already ready? I've gone through the slings and arrows of fortune, and I'm tired, and so I don't care. Is it that kind?
The question is to be or not to be. And
Indeed, indeed.
Not to be would be not seeking any intervention or treatment, and going into palliative care, and then
Okay.
coming to an end. But I have to say, these last 3 years of my life have been like this astonishing, I've arrived at this place
Synchronicities.
of rest and serenity
Okay,
and
and
comfort
that's good.
and
Good.
total absence of stress.
Okay.
And so it's been the most amazing gift.
Mhm.
But the thing is, one thing that concerns me is that to define my life in that way, satisfactory, but it's also, in a way, it's the easy way out.
That's true. That's true.
The other way, I'm confronted with whatever risk might lie ahead. I don't have the advantage of I'm young enough to know what aging is, but without having to go through all the consequences of aging.
Right.
And so they keep balancing out.
I see. Yeah. So it's either way at this point. You see the pendulum
Yeah.
going one way or the other, and
Yeah.
there's not a big impact either
Right.
way.
Right.
That's
And
how I'm hearing you.
I've never taken the easy way out, but
Uh-huh.
then maybe this is my chance.
Oh, okay, that's one Okay, well, really, I do hope that this suggestion of Ignatius
Yeah.
might help.
I think that.
But again, if I may note, Ignatius is a very, very so-called left-brained and analytic person who gives us all of these norms for making a Jesuit advice on practically almost anything.
Yeah, yeah.
I have to find that.
Yeah, by all means. And so anyway, this is his own anecdote about decision making. When I was in elementary school, our science teacher once asked our class to visit a nearby stream and draw out a glass of water, whose contents we would bring into class and to peer at under a microscope. But before we could use the microscope, said our teacher, we would need to set the glass on a windowsill overnight. The water needed to be cleared. Plunging a glass directly into the pond will bring up all sorts of dirt, leaves, and twigs. Even after a few hours, the water will still be cloudy. But if you let it settle, things become clearer. So the advice of Ignatius is analyze all of those factors and see which ones correspond. And the Buddha, complementing that, would say, sit with it and see what comes up.
Well, I do have
And then
to say-
check it against those